You are listening to Chthonia, the podcast of the Dark Feminine. Chthonia's logo was designed by J.R. Malpair. Background music is Phantasm by Kevin MacLeod. Hello and welcome to Chthonia. I'm your host, Breach Burke, and this episode we are working our way through the Das Mahavidyas, the 10 as they're described, tantric visions of the divine feminine. And now we are currently up to Tara. Now, as I've said earlier, we are not going in order. Technically, in the order put forth in the stories about the Mahavidyas, the one we're discussing today is the second one. Okay, and her name is Tara. Okay, Tara. There's been, I have read some writings from sadhaks and from tantras and from tantrikas and people who have said that the Mahavidya stories, even though here in the podcast we are doing them out of order, technically the order is significant. So Kali is usually listed as the first, and sort of the intensity, or perhaps the I hate to use the word purity, but let's just say it goes from the least material to the most material. In terms of the order of the 10. So the Mahavidyas who are listed first are closer and closer to the core of pure consciousness without form. It might be helpful for people who are interested in Kabbalah to think of the Tree of Life, where Keter, or the crown, is close to the Ein Sof, or Ein Sofer, which is like limitless light, which is formless, and that it moves its way through the 10 Sephirot down to Malkut, which of course is the kingdom, and that is sort of the manifestation of divine on the earth and in the world. And so you move from sort of the less dense to the more dense, I suppose. Plato talks a little bit about this too in his ideas of form, but unfortunately what tends to happen is that there tends to be the idea that the lighter, more spiritual is somehow better than the denser and more material. And actually, all of it is part of the same system. I plan to talk about that when I talk about Kamala, who's actually the 10th Mahavidya. So I'm going to sidetrack that discussion for now. For right now, though, we are going to go to Tara. Now, Tara is interesting because she looks almost identical to Kali. In fact, I have seen images of Kali posted that are actually Tara. And it's not that easy, and it's a very easy mistake to make, and it's not necessarily that one is not the other, because Kali and Tara are to some degree part of the same type of Shakti. But there are some differences with Tara from Kali. Okay, the name Tara means star, and she's often known, David Kinsley describes her as the goddess who guides through troubles. Her associations, she's associated with the energy of the sun, and she's also associated with the fire of cremation. Like, she is the literal fire of the cremation grounds. Okay? When there are images of her, she looks like Kali with the blue skin, the tongue hanging out, or the mouth open, the necklace of, skulls or heads. The difference is that there's a few differences with Tara, and she's standing on a corpse or on the body of Shiva, one or the other. She's always shown, though, with a fiery background. There's always a blaze behind her, okay? So Tara is always shown with a blaze. She also always appears with, like, a full curvy stomach and breasts. Now, while nothing has ever explicitly described her as pregnant, she sort of has this maternal look to her. Kali is always perceived as very thin or very emaciated. Some images portray her as sort of like a slim, attractive female kind of thing. And it's not that Tara is not portrayed that way, but she's portrayed as more curvy. She's got, a curvy front. And the implication, the images I have seen that you will probably see if you are watching the YouTube version of this, seem to imply pregnancy. Again, even though that's not overtly stated. So there's a maternal aspect or implication to Tara. And she also wears a tiger skin. Which tiger skin now is, when we talk about Chamunda, the tiger skin, who also wears a tiger skin, there's the sense that the tiger skin represents the desires and the conquering of desire. Okay, so there's that, that aspect of it, or the controlling of it. But also, because Kali is purely naked, Tara has this there's a little bit more that's going on here in the form of control. There's a little bit more, even with the very fierce destructive aspect, there's also a sense of being maternal. And interestingly, Tara is associated with salvation. Now, salvation is not really a concept in Hinduism. Liberation is. And that, of course, is probably what is meant. But salvation in this case literally means saving from death. And we'll see that there's an origin for that in the Buddhist Tara. Okay, now the Buddhist Tara is probably the precursor of the Hindu Tara, although there's some disagreement about that. They seem to be somewhat contemporary, but the Buddhist Tara, she's probably first emerged. There's some texts that suggest the Buddhist Tara may have been around since about the 6th century CE. But I think she's first sort of explicitly mentioned around the 8th century, and it's said that she's worshipped after, excuse me, after the 11th century. Okay, around the 6th century, there was sort of a movement towards the female bodhisattvas, and the more greater inclusion of women in Buddhism. So we see Tara as a manifestation at this time. Now, in the Buddhist tradition, Tara is said to be born from the tear of the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara upon his Mahasamadhi, which would be the time that, well, we would think of it as death, but for these very great Bodhisattvas, there tends to be that time when they are leaving the body to achieve nirvana, to be, to get off the wheel of birth and death, and to be, to achieve that. But it's said that Avalokiteshvara looked down and saw the sufferings of people, and even though he was looking, he was looking at a large lake in the world. I forget the name of the lake now, but it reminded him of the lakes of hell where people were suffering in anguish, and it caused him to, tears to fall from his eyes, and he had two different entities that came from these tears that fell, and one of them is the goddess Tara. Okay, and so she is considered to be born from the tears of compassion from Avalokiteshvara. And in many Buddhist interpretations, Tara is born as a kind of a bodhisattva herself. Either she is the queen, she's always in the royal family of Tibet, but either in China or in Nepal, she is born like either as green Tara or white Tara. And there are many images of her that you can find. I have one downstairs myself, and she's a very benign-looking figure. She's a very, obviously very Asian-looking figure, but she tends to look more Chinese or more rather than Indian per se. Obviously, in her look, and but she has very, very gentle and compassionate look about her. Very gentle, very motherly. Now, the Buddhist Tara is associated, like I said, she's associated with cheating death. She cannot stand to see the suffering of her devotees, so she will step in and she will intervene and save them from deadly situations. Now, David Kinsley, again, in our Tantric Visions of the Divine Feminines, thinks that the Hindu Tara came out of this Buddhist Tara. However, there's another scholar, Mala Ghosh, who thinks that Tara is actually a manifestation of the goddess Durga. So, which came first, chicken or the egg kind of a thing. It's not certain. What is clear is that there's a relationship between the two of them, and the relationship is compassion. But their aspects are very different. Now, having said that, Buddhist Tara does have, even though she's portrayed as this benign, smiling, compassionate figure, there is a text called the Tibetan Homages to the 21 Taras. And they mention her fierce aspects. And I want to read a few of these to you. Now, this is, mind you, this is from the Buddhist text, okay? This is not Hindu at the moment. So listen to this description of the Buddhist Tara. Homage lady who annihilates the heroes of Mara, Ture, the terrible lady, slaying all enemies by frowning the brows of her lotus face. Homage lady who strikes the earth with her hand, who pounds upon it with her feet, shattering the 7 underworlds with the sound hum made by her frowning brows. By the way, just as a side comment, that would connect her to Durga, because Durga shatters the armies of the great demon with the sound hum. Okay, and Homage lady who strikes with the feet of Ture, whose seed is the form of the syllable hum, shaking Mount Meru, Mandara, Kailasha, and all the triple world. And they mentioned this particularly fierce form of Tara called Tara Kurokula, and described as father. Father, listen to me, oh my God. Is that Freudian? I don't know. But she's described as follows, is what I was trying to say. Homage and praise to her, who stands in the dancing pose, haughty with furious rage, who has a diadem of 5 skulls, who bears a tiger skin. I pay homage to the red one, bearing her fangs, whose body is frightful, who is adorned with the 5 signs of ferocity, whose necklace is 100 human heads, who is the conqueress of Mara. Okay? And so there's this Tara Kurokula in Buddhism, and we see in her a much closer relationship to the Hindu Tara. Okay, now the Hindu Tara is first mentioned in a 7th century Hindu text called the Vasvadatta. Okay, and the translated quote from Kinsley is, "The Lady Twilight was seen, devoted to the stars and clad in red sky, as a Buddhist nun." Okay, so it's interesting. So that's just it. The Lady Twilight, this star, Tara, your star, devoted to the stars and clad in red sky. So there's a red color associated with Tara. Okay, so we're going to notice when we talk about the rest of the Mahavidyas, some of them have certain specific colors. So Tara seems to be associated with the color red, even though her skin is like that blue-black of Kali. And also as a Buddhist nun, okay, so there's this idea of the, very spiritual, renounced bodhisattva-type Buddhist woman. Okay. Now let's, by contrast, talk about the Hindu Tara. We did talk about the fierce aspects of the Buddhist Tara, and you'll see some similarities here. This is from the Tara Tantra. Tara is described, standing firmly with her left foot on a corpse, she laughs loudly, transcendent. Her hands hold a sword, a blue lotus, a dagger, and a begging bowl. She raises her war cry, hum. Her matted tawny hair is bound with poisonous blue snakes. Thus the terrifying Tara destroys the unconscious of the 3 worlds and carries them off on her head to the other shore. Now we're going to talk about the other shore in a little bit. Okay. And this Tara, again, and when you see images of her, you're going to say, wow, she looks just like Kali, except for those few little details that were mentioned. So in this particular podcast, what I want to talk about are 4 particular different aspects of Tara that are important to understanding her. First is the Tantric Tara, and I'm going to tell you for that the story of the sage Vasista. That's an incredibly important story. You know, to me, it's the essence of the Tara story. That's the important one. We also have this maternal Tara, this maternal aspect, and I have another story connected with that. There's her association with the sun and with the fires, okay? And then, lastly, her association with compassion. And there I want to talk about sort of different ideas about compassion, which may not really be that different at the root, but what we think about when we talk about compassion in Buddhism and Hinduism versus traditional Buddhism versus Hindu ideas and sort of tantric ideas. And I think I'm going to finish up with a few other stories of Tara, a few other maybe not as popular renderings of her, but stories of her and her, origins or significance nonetheless. Okay, so I'm going to start with the Tantric Tara. Now I'm going to read from the story of Sage Vasista, and I'm going to take this from David Kinsley. Now the Tara that he encounters is called Mahachina Tara. And there's also, in Hinduism, she is sometimes also referred to as Ugara Tara, okay? And this implies a very, very ferocious kind of an aspect. Okay, so let me just tell this story as he tells it here. Okay. So, the most convincing testimony to Tara's earlier Buddhist association is a myth that features the sage Vasista's attempts to worship Tara. Once upon a time, he did austerities for 10,000 years, but got no results. He went to the god Brahma and asked for a powerful mantra that might help him. Brahma told him about the glory of Tara. It is through Tara's power, he said, that he creates the world, Vishnu protects it, and Shiva destroys it. Okay, so remember now, Tara is a Shakti. She's the power. Without the power of the divine feminine, nothing moves. Okay. says she is infinitely more glorious than a million of suns. Okay, there's her something. And she is the source of all light, and she reveals the Vedas. Brahma then told Vasista to recite the Tara mantra for success. Vasista went to Kamakhya at the famous goddess shrine in Assam and undertook Tara's worship. After 1,000 years, he was still unsuccessful. At this point, the sage became angry and was about to curse Tara for her indifference. The whole earth trembled in fear, and even the gods were disturbed. At that moment, Tara appeared in front of Vasista. She told him that he had been wasting his time because he did not understand her or know how to worship her. It's interesting, this very austere and pure way of approaching the goddess, and Tara's telling him no. She said that Vasista did not know her appearance in the form of Tara, and that she could not be propitiated through yoga and austerities. Only Vishnu in the form of Buddha knows my form of worship, she said, and to learn this kind of worship you have to go to China. Tara then disappeared. Vasista went to Tibet to find out what to do. Near the Himalayas, he had a vision of the Buddha surrounded by many beautiful girls and intoxicated with wine. They were all naked, drinking, and carousing. Vasista was shocked and refused an invitation to take part in the frolic. Then a voice from the sky said to him, "This is the best way of worshipping Tara. If you want immediate success, you have to adopt this type of worship." Vasista then took refuge in Vishnu in his form as the Buddha and asked to be instructed in this method. The Buddha revealed to him the Kula Marga, a tantric type of sadhana, warning him that it was very secret. A central feature of this path is the ritual of the 5 forbidden things. Now you can go back to my Tantra intros to learn about those. But they involve eating certain foods, including meat, and having sex, and drinking wine, or drinking alcohol. With this ritual and on this path, one can live in the midst of good and bad things while remaining aloof from them, the Buddha told him. On this path, there's no need for traditional types of rituals. Worship is mental and not physical. All times are auspicious. Nothing is inauspicious. There is no difference between pure and impure. There are no restrictions on what one can eat or drink. Worship can be done any place and any time. A friendly attitude towards women should be cultivated, and a worship of women should be practiced. Okay. Now that to me is a very sort of critical statement. There's no difference. The differences are the ones we create socially, and they're the ones we create morally. Now, I have said in the past, I have talked about ancient religions like the religions of ancient Greece and Babylon and Sumeria, and even probably very, very early Judaism, which was very much like Canaanite religion. All of these very early religions, especially these pagan religions, are not about morality. It's not about right and wrong. It's just about the way the forces in the universe move. Sometimes they're in balance, sometimes they're not. Sometimes things have to happen to put them back in balance. But it's not about auspicious or inauspicious. Okay? Auspicious and inauspicious are preferences. They are based on what we feel those effects are on ourselves. Okay? And at this kind of level of knowledge, everything that happens, none of it matters in the sense of, if you're having bad times, it's not because, necessarily the gods are displeased with you. Could be, in some of those old ways of thinking. Or it could just be that there are things that are out of balance, but there's no idea here. The idea is that it's not that by living a certain quote-unquote good life that you are going to avoid something. This is not your traditional good people go to heaven, bad people go to hell. This is not even traditionally what we think of with Buddhism, with renouncing the world. Even the Buddha himself, as we think of him, when we think of Gautama Buddha, one of the things was he of course, grew up very rich, but then he went to the desert to practice austerities, and one of the things he learned that very severe austerities are also a kind of attachment, because you can become attached to your austerities and attached to your, how good and how pure you are. And so this shows a fundamental danger. But Tara is saying, I'm beyond all of that. Forget about your good and bad. And, all of it's part of the same system. All of it is holy in its own way, if you want to use that term. Okay? All of it is part of the divine. So this to me is like a really powerful, powerful statement. And a powerful critique of what we might normally think of as, either traditional Buddhist practice or traditional Brahmin practice, or even our traditional Western practice, which if you're religious, you're either told to follow certain rules to avoid, whether you call it sin or whether you call it something else, the idea of, it's almost Zoroastrian idea of siding with the good over the evil. When, as I frequently ask my religion students, we always have a class where I say, okay, define evil for me, and there's always inevitably someone who connects it with morality. And I'm like, well, it's connected with morality maybe in as much as it may represent a lack of conscience, Someone who can, for example, brutally murder another person without any consideration for them as a human being, that person's is probably evil or probably has evil impulses. But what most people do, because they enjoy things that people consider to be excesses or somehow not moral, like women who like to have, loose women who like to have sex and that kind of a thing, they're somehow evil. It's like, yeah, it's not the word I would use. And according to this, it's like, no, that's part of everything. That is as sacred as everything else. And that is what tends to be missed by those who sit in the desert under their tree and practice their austerities. Alan Watts has a great lecture on this. I forget what the name of the lecture is now. But I remember he talks about the spiritual person. It might be the You Cannot Improve Yourself lecture. It might be that one. But he says the spiritual person needs like a beer and a burp, and he says, and the excessively material person needs a hard bed and a night in the woods. It's kind of like you need some elements of both, but it's not about renouncing one in favor of the other. That's not necessarily the way that it is. And in the tantric view, it's no. You embrace all of it because all of it is divine, even if all of it's considered to be quote unquote Maya or illusion. Well, Maya is a goddess. Maya is divine. As you move toward dissolution, you come to recognize that these things are temporal. But if you're not attached to them, it doesn't matter. It's like, okay, well, I can just enjoy this, and when it goes away, it goes away. So Tara. That story of Tara really drives home that truth. Okay, so let me talk about the maternal aspect of Tara. There's another story, which I'm going to read also from Kinsley, and it connects her to Shiva, okay? Kinsley says he's come across a particularly intriguing story about the two, meaning Shiva and Tara. The myth begins with the churning of the ocean. Shiva has drunk the poison that was created from the churning of the ocean, thus saving the world from destruction, but has fallen unconscious under its powerful effect. Tara appears and takes Shiva on her lap. She suckles him, the milk from her breasts counteracts the poison, and he recovers. So in this sense, even though Shiva is a divine being, she sort of quote-unquote saves him from death. This myth is reminiscent of the one in which Shiva stops the rampaging Kali by becoming an infant. Seeing the child, Kali's maternal instincts come to the fore, and she becomes quiet and nurses the infant Shiva. In both cases, Shiva assumes the position of an infant vis-a-vis the goddess. Okay, so so there's this relationship of Shiva and Tara as, almost dropped that, almost as mother and son. Okay, so, and so what does this imply? Okay, again, this kind of subordinates Shiva to Tara, but at the same time, it shows kind of a gentler side, a gentler aspect of her. And she is one who is able to overcome, these sort of poisons. And this is something that, of course, her tiger skin would probably represent, this idea of being able to control all of these kinds of things. Usually it has to do with the passions, but you have to remember the demonic in Hinduism frequently has to do with certain elements that get out of control, lust for power, anger, hatred, these things that get out of control and out of balance. So, her influence is able to, her maternal side is able to counteract that. Okay. So in a way, she is sort of almost the maternal aspect of Kali as well, in spite of her rather scary appearance. Now, her association with the cremation fire. Here's another story I want to read to you. Okay, let me just find it in my note. Okay. This is from a document that I had pulled, and of course I don't have the name of the source in front of me. I'll have to include it in the notes somewhere. But just to read from this was something I found on a Hindu site, site having to do with the Mahavidyas on the web. There's another non-popular version of Tara story is when the firm landmass on Earth was created using fragments of Madhu and Kaita's bodies. That did not cause the birth of life because there was nothing other than water and firm landmass on Earth. Hence, creation was still incomplete. After water and earth, the sun was required to provide life force. To create the same, Mahashakti had taken the form of Tara, and Mahadev, who was Shiva, had taken the form of Lord Dakshineshwar. He and goddess Tara were the reasons that they had brought the sun into existence. Without the eternal sun, the earth was just a mere orb covered in ice on which life could not have survived. That is why Devi Tara had appeared from whom the sun had to arise and supply light and energy to the earth. So she's not the sun, but she is the energy behind the sun. Tara has the capability to produce light, energy, and heat. When the power met with the power of Chthonia, which, by the way, is the serpent that she wears in her hair. It's another bodhisattva sort of figure who is connected to her, like almost like a spouse but lives as a serpent in her hair. Their combined power became the source of the sun. And remember that the serpent in Hinduism, we think of it, the serpent in the West, it's associated with the devil in the garden and things like that. For a lot of people, the serpent in the East definitely has to do with, and in Christian Gnosticism, I guess, has to do with divine wisdom and the sort of life force. If you think about the Kundalini in the spine, as we've talked about, the life energy that comes up through the spine, that's usually considered to be the form of a serpent. So the serpent is actually considered to be very beneficent and represents life in the field of time, with the power to throw off death, as Joseph Campbell said, mainly because the snake can shed its skin and it looks like you have a whole new snake, even though you really don't. He's just getting rid of his skin, but that's kind of the metaphor. Okay, back to this. When the combined powers of Lord Chthonia and Devi Tara got integrated in the sea, many pulsating energy orbs were created, which led to the expansion of energy. Goddess Tara created tremendous airflow from her breath, which hit the energy bodies and led to their union. So these, of course, is the four traditional elements: fire, air, water, earth. And that's showing how Tara represents that fire element, okay, that that brings light. Now, and also we have to think about, remember what we've said about the Shakti energy as the source. It's frequently portrayed as either sexual energy or as a fire, or as, it's just this very potent blast that, is, again, mishandled. Like, that's why I say I tell people to use caution with Kundalini Yoga if they've not been properly trained by somebody who's proficient. You can do a lot of damage to yourself if your Shakti is suddenly activated in that way. I mean, it can cause mental trauma, it can cause physical trauma. So, it's like anything else. It's like turning on the electricity in your house without having somebody inspect the code. I mean, it could turn everything on and then set your house on fire. So you got to be careful with the energy. So here Tara represents the Shakti sort of as this sun energy that warms the earth and that allows life to flourish. Okay, but now she's also associated with the cremation fire. So she serves a purifying function, getting rid of the body, okay, not the consciousness, but the body itself. Now in Tantra, at death, I read this in, I think I read it in Kali's Odia. This was another, this is about an Odia, sort of a Kali shaman, if you will, who I think now is at the temple of Kali in Laguna Beach, but he's from India, and he talks about his, I don't know if she was sort of she was a woman who was close to him throughout his life. I can't quite remember their specific relationship, but he loved her very much. And when she suddenly died, she was bitten by a snake and died. When they took the body away, he actually was told to mutilate the body, not because, mainly because they wanted to say, don't attach yourself to the image of the body, don't hold the person back by your attachment to the image of them in this form. Okay, so the body is not considered quite as important. It's just one of the forms you can take, and it can go away, and then you take another form. Okay, so the cremation fire represents that purification, that getting rid of the attachment to whatever your circumstances are, and being prepared for dissolution and rebirth or whatever. Now, this is not necessarily a final thing, but Tara also can bring one over the ocean of samsara, that you can take you off the wheel of life and death. And that leads to her last association. That is the mother of compassion. Now, I have in my notes, I'm reminded of a bhajan, which is like a hymn or a song, a Hindu song, called Durge Durge. It's a very simple song. But it's supposed to be about, it refers to Kali, Kapalini, the goddess Kali with her, garland of heads. So it kind of merges Durga and Kali, but there's this aspect that's mentioned, Karuna Sagara Ma, the mother who is the ocean of compassion, okay? And Kali herself is very much highly associated with compassion. Now, if we take this very fierce Tara of Hinduism and compare it to the usually not fierce, even though there are some, as we saw with those homages to Tara, in Buddhism, now we get down to the idea of what are we talking about when we talk about compassion. Now, the term compassion, usually it comes from, the roots of the word come from the idea of suffering along with. So to have compassion for somebody, compassion, passion, comes from the term for pathos or suffering. And then the com part is like, that together. So it's this idea of, working, being between, so it's where you can understand or you can feel for someone else's suffering, okay, when you have compassion. So, and when you are compassionate, then you behave in a certain way towards people. You're not just seeing them as objects. You're not just being selfish, saying, yeah, well, whatever, I'm the only one who counts here. Compassion allows you to, but compassion doesn't always, I should be careful how I say that, because sometimes even when you understand someone's suffering, the best thing for somebody is not always for you to just comfort them and, feed them and nourish them. Sometimes the best thing you can do is to walk away from them and let them sort their stuff out. Compassion is not necessarily about always being maternal and nourishing. And of course we see that in Tara because she has both aspects. She can be very maternal, but she can also be, she also has this ferocious, there's an aspect of her that loves blood sacrifice, okay? She's about compassion in the sense of bringing clarity, okay? About keeping you from being trapped in an illusion that makes you unhappy. And in that sense, it's related to Buddhism, because Buddhism's one of their main dictates is all human life is suffering. So when we talk about, having compassion for suffering, sometimes that just simply means being able to recognize the illusory state that you're in so that you can end your suffering. Because if you realize, yes, this is happening, but it's more like a play or like an illusion, you may not take it as seriously and you may not suffer as much. You may be able to detach yourself from it. That doesn't mean that you don't necessarily participate or experience or enjoy it. This is the other message of Tara. But you recognize it for what it is, and it's not something you become attached or addicted to, okay? So the compassion part is the, it's this cutting away of that which is false. And, so when you have that clarity in the truth, and so, there's the illusion of separateness, but there's also this mindfulness of creation and dissolution as being part of the same process. And, and being able to accept all of that as part of the process. It's like accepting all of it, the entire world, quote unquote, auspicious and inauspicious, as sort of holy, and everything being as it is. Now, I may have mentioned this in the past, but the one time, at least one of the times, I can't say it's like this is something that happens regularly, but when I've had experiences of what I consider to be samadhi, okay, and they always come very spontaneously when they have come. It's not anything that I can bring on through practice or anything like that. Although the very first time it happened, I remember I was at work, and I may have told this story already, so I don't want to be too repetitive, but I keep it short. But I had been at work, and it was New Year's Eve, and, I worked for the government, and a lot of people got to go home early. My division didn't get to go home early, and I was a union rep. Everybody was mad. Why do they get to home early? We don't, blah, 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 right? So I remember there used to be a labyrinth that the nearby convent would have. So I just thought, okay, and I had just recently learned to meditate, and I most recently received the mantra from my guru. So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to go over there and walk the labyrinth. So I did. Now, of course, the whole time I walked the labyrinth and tried to recite my mantra, all I could think was this nonsense going on at work. So I felt very sort of unsettled. And I remember walking out thinking, God, all this crap. It's like, the whole thing, because I had been doing practices for years even before that. And I just thought, is this all just a waste of time or what? I mean, what does meditation lead to anyway, And then it was almost like, in answer to that, I walked outside, and that was when I had my first experience of samadhi. And I mentioned this experience specifically because this whole essence of Tara, as representing compassion, as representing acceptance of the auspicious and the inauspicious, and of the world being as it is, that's all kind of rolled into that experience. And it's impossible to describe. But literally, you almost can see things like you're standing in the center of this disturbance, this set of waves and energy that is what we perceive as the real world. And all of it is exactly as it needs to be, even the stuff that we consider to be bad. And that's a very hard thing to fathom. And it's not an intellectual or a moral. There's no judgment at all. It's just you feel the isness of things. I don't even want to say the rightness of things, the isness of things. Things are. And I can't really say a whole lot beyond that. And as you can see, describing it, you kind of go, yeah, okay, so what, But no, it is absolutely the most profound experience. And it allows you to see everything in a very, very different light. So I felt that was kind of an act of grace, as it were. I mean, that I had that experience. Because then I was just like, oh, and of course, yes, there are physical impacts on the body when that happens too. I mean, I felt the Shakti like really super activated when that happened, and it was, but again, and it was weird because it was like walking in a space of quiet and seeing the chaos rotating around you, but somehow it didn't touch you. So I don't know. It's a very hard thing to describe, but this to me, is the essence of this. Compassionate mother who also represents the ferocity, and the this sort of complex interplay between life and death that we see in the world. Now, Tara is said to take souls over the ocean of samsara to liberation. That is so. In this sense, she is related to the Buddhist Tara, and that she is compassionate. You can see him as saving from death, quote unquote. In the Eastern system, it might be being saved from rebirth. From being, but rebirth actually is okay too. I mean, it's okay to keep playing the game over and over again until you get tired of it, and eventually you do get off the wheel. But it's not quite so judgmental and didactic as we like to think. So, okay, let me just tell you some final stories about Tara here. Find them in my note. Okay. So again, this is from the similar document that I had, that I picked up on the web from a site on the Mahavidyas. And yeah, like I said, I have to find the link for this. But it says, according to the Adutta Ramayana, when Sita in the form of Kali slew the demon Ravana, Brahma and other deities propitiated her with hymns. Appeased, the goddess assumed the calmer form of Tara. Holding her sword in her right hand, she accepted a tiger skin loincloth from Brahma, removed her golden crown, piled her hair into a single jata on top of her head, and bound it with the serpent Akshobhya. Rudra laid on the ground and requested the boon of Brahmavidya, knowledge from her, to which she responded by placing her left foot on his chest and enlightening him. As a thanks, Shiva offered her a blue lotus and a skull cup. Okay, now why on his chest? Well, I mean, that's the foot of the goddess, the Shakti activating the heart center, okay? And knowledge, comes out of the heart center, whether it move up or down, okay? And I hear my phone ringing over there, so I'm just going to have to try to ignore that for now. Okay. Variant version of this speaks of Tara's demon-slaying form. A demon called Hayagriva wrought havoc everywhere, banishing the devas from the Amaravati and robbing them of their possessions. The devas approached Brahma, who in turn led them to Kali. Kali created another goddess, Tara, from her third eye and sent her to defeat Hayagriva. In the ensuing battle, Tara slew Hayagriva. Okay, so again, she's another, in a way, she's related to that Durga form, the slayer of demons, the remover of obstacles. Okay, so, okay, here's another one where they say a version from the Kalika Purana associates Tara with Matangi. Now, we've talked about Matangi, the goddess of pollution. According to this version, when the Devas were defeated by the demons Shumba and Nishumba, okay, this is the beginning of the Devi Mahatmayam, if you remember, they sought refuge in the Himalayas and began to propitiate Devi. At that time, Shiva's wife, Parvati, in this time her dark-skinned form, Matangi, saw the Devas and asked whom they were propitiating. Before the Devas could answer, the fair-complexioned Mahasaraswati emerged from Matangi's body and replied that the Devas were propitiating her. Since Mahasaraswati manifested from Matangi's body, the fair-complexioned, eight-armed goddess came to be known as Koshiki, meaning sheath. In turn, Matangi's dark complexion caused her to be known as Kali and also as Ugra Tara. Okay, so this connects Matangi and Tara, which again, as you can see, there's a tremendous amount of relationship between the other Mahavidyas, these other feminine forms, and Tara. In some senses, they're all one. Okay, but they represent different aspects. There's another that connects Tara to Shodashi to provide all forms of greenery and plants to the world. Devi Shodashi placed bamboo inside the earth and poured one drop of water from her water pot, gave birth to all plant life, and then all forest, trees, plants, and nature. Shodashi, who's also known as Tripura Sundari, we are going to talk about in the next episode. Okay, so that might be a good segue to that for the next one. But let's just sum up on Tara here. Okay, you have a terrible, fierce Hindu goddess who delights in blood sacrifice, represents the cremation fires, is always pictured with fire, and with the bloody heads and so forth. But her essential nature is actually one of compassion and has a defined maternal side. Now here we're seeing compassion defined as, taking someone away from their illusions, keeping them from following false paths, okay? And what's false for someone? Well, it all depends. What's true for some person might be false for another. There's an asocial or antisocial aspect to Tara, just as there is to all of the other Hindu Mahavidyas and all the Tantric goddesses. They don't represent the social norm, a normal social order for women. They subvert the social order, okay? And they represent this supreme feminine power that is dominant over the men, not in our sort of patriarchal culture, where it's the other way around, or even in our religions where it's frequently the other way around. And it leaves me with kind of one final reflection here, which is why Hindu society, and like Western society, it is kind of embedded in the religion, but in a religion where the Divine Mother is central, why does it treat women as second-class citizens while having lofty feminine ideals? Okay, you worship the Devi, you worship, these forms of the mother, you worship Lalita Tripura Sundari. I mean, all these very specific divine forms of the feminine are considered to be, the supreme powers in Hinduism. So why do women have the status that they have? Okay, and it's very interesting because the whole, it's not a question I'm sure that I can accurately answer. Perhaps it's one that the whole Chthonia system just kind of raises. Is it because you are afraid of those powers and you need to keep them in check in an appropriate way? And is it more about the difference between the life of the average person and the person who carves their own way? You know what I mean? Because materially and socially, there's a very different expectation for what people should, especially socially. Because the Mahavidyas represent an upending of the social order and removal of social status. I remember a friend of mine, an Indian friend of mine who I used to work with, she would talk about her daughter, and if her daughter, didn't listen to her or misbehaved or didn't want to do what she said, she'd refer to as Chandi. You're being Chandi, because, which of course is, we know Chandika or Chandi, another version of these goddesses, and usually the word means angry or, and so, this idea of the woman as Chandi, and people are frightened by that, particularly frightened by that. as though, and I mean, and again, that particular Shakti power is not only present in women, it's also present in men. It's present in everything. And I would personally argue that men who become in touch with their own Shakti are actually more powerful men than men who seem to think that they're better than women or over women or have to put women in their place. If you have to do that, then you're actually weaker and you have something to be afraid of, is the way I look at it. Why do you need to be afraid of women and of the status of women? Why does it matter if your wife or whatever does, certain things? Why does she have to have a certain place and you have to be the one in charge? The only reason you would have to do that is if you feel somehow threatened by that energy, or you feel somehow a loss of power in the face of the feminine. So all things to keep in mind here. It's not, and these are part of the questions that I always ask in connecting these kind of, archetypal ideas, if you were, these sort of core, I don't know if I want to call them, they're religious to a point, they're spiritual to a point, these things that have to do with the nature of reality in this, that's non-material. Or that maybe includes the material. I shouldn't say it's non-material, but having to do with the essence or the true, the true essence of consciousness and of energy in the universe from this point of view. Why is the feminine, we're starting to see in this power why the feminine might be considered so threatening to people. But then the question becomes, well, is the way to deal with that to try to repress it and subjugate it and to put it in its place, in the name of quote unquote control? Is that really what the answer is? Or if there was a looser adoption of these energies and an acceptance of them, just as the sage of Vasisto, and when he talks to the Buddha says you need to be kind to women and you need to treat women with respect. You can't treat women like they're, because they are sort of the material embodiment of that. And again, so are men too, but men are very much shamed out of dealing with any part of their feminine side. You see, like, for example, a boy who plays with dolls, and then some male figure has to come along and say, he's not going to play with dolls, that's not manly, Not all, and again, this is a different time, not all fathers or uncles or, whatever would do something like that. But you still do see a fair amount of this. Men who like to dress as women, it's just kind of like, that's not acceptable. So, there's still this idea that the feminine, and we often say it's because the feminine is somehow weaker, and it's like, no, actually, I suspect it's because it's the opposite. So with that final thought, I will leave you for now, and I'm going to again encourage you, please check out Chthonia.net. It is totally revamped. Things should be a lot clearer to use, and there's a lot more on offer there. The podcast is certainly there. My list of publications is there, but there is also a lot more in terms of my related services and my other video series, Liminal Tarot. But I also do I have a Reiki system that I use as well. So people can feel free to check out those things and check out those other videos as well on YouTube. It's on the same channel, Chthonia. Yes, check me out on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I'm there mostly as Chthonia on YouTube, Chthonia Podcast as one word on Twitter and Instagram, and then Chthonia Podcast is 2 words on Facebook. It's just the nature of when I had to sign up for names, what was available and what wasn't. So check those out. And like I said, if you're interested in donating, patreon.com/Chthonia, you can become a patron, or if you go to Chthonia.net, there's a place to make a one-time donation if you're interested in doing that. It helps me make, have better content, maybe perhaps get some better technology, and help support me in a time when, I actually don't have right now like a whole lot of financial support for this. So that would be very helpful if it's something that interests you enough and you're willing. And I thank all of those who already are my patron subscribers. You've all been great troopers who've stuck with me. This is just about a year that I'm recording this, that I've been doing Chthonia. So I thank you all very much. And for everyone, I will talk to you, tell you more, I should say, in the next episode.